Last week on Tech Talk, we talked about whether Linux was a suitable alternative for folks who are leaving Windows 10 because of the end of support for that operating system. And I'm sure if you watch that video, you're just dying to know how you get that Linuxy goodness into one of these older machines. Well, today on Tech Talk, we're going to address that and walk you step by step through a Linux install on this old Dell that has an Intel Core i5 6500 CPU. Stay with me, we're going to be looking at that right now. So just before we get into installing Linux on this old Dell with its Windows 10 operating system, I wanted to make a couple of comments about last week's video. First of all, it generated some pretty robust conversation down in the comments. I greatly appreciate everybody that pitched in. Had no idea the Linux community was so passionate about their operating system. It's really, really nice to see. A few of you took the time to generate some fairly long comments that went into really good detail about how Linux works and some tips for living with Linux if you're a former Windows user. I really appreciate those comments. They're super helpful for anybody that might come across them that has an interest in this operating system, so thanks for that. Also, a couple of viewers mentioned OnlyOffice as a good replacement for LibreOffice because it's more compatible with the Microsoft Office products. I did download OnlyOffice. I am working with it, and so far it looks really good. So thanks for that. That was a super helpful tip as well. Now, that having been said, just like last week, I want you to know that this week's video is similarly going to be geared to folks who are maybe Windows 10 refugees. They've been cast adrift by the end of support for Windows 10. They're fetching around for something to do for an operating system. So it's geared for folks that maybe have never used Linux before, maybe never even seen it before, and certainly have never installed it. So because of that, what I've done is I've decided to do an install that is the simplest install possible for a brand new user. So I've made two choices that kind of come out of that. The first is this install is going to be done on a one drive, one partition basis. So the operating system, the user data is just going to be in a single partition. Now, the reasons for that are that, first of all, it's the easiest way to install Linux. And the second is that for most Windows users, let's face it, like 90% of Windows installs are done the same way. The user folder and the OS goes to the C drive. So for people who are used to Windows, it kind of maintains that continuity. The chances are their system in Windows was set up the same way, one partition for the OS and for user data. So we're going to do Linux the same way because of the simplicity and the familiarity. The second thing I've decided is not to do a dual boot install. Again, by doing just a single boot install, by having Linux replace Windows, it makes the installation easier. We don't have to have a long conversation about partitions and sizing the partitions and adjusting the partitions. And also, once you do dual boot, it brings in all kinds of questions about sharing files between the two operating systems, which is a degree of complexity that most new users aren't going to be comfortable with. And that is a whole separate video all on its own and then some. So don't get on my case too badly about the decisions I've made on this install. I've done it for reasons of simplicity. I think if you're coming out of a pre-built computer like this, just doing a plain Jane Linux install on the one partition is probably the thing that's most familiar to you. It's the easiest thing to do, and I think it's the thing most people will be comfortable with. You may want to challenge those decisions. Feel free to do so in the comments down below. Personally, I'm torn between the one partition versus multiple partitions install method, so I am looking forward to seeing people argue that both ways. But without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's take a look at exactly what it takes to get Linux on this old Dell. Now, the good news is installing Ubuntu Linux is really, really straightforward, and we're going to do everything on the computer that Linux is being installed on. This is my old Dell with the i5 6500 CPU, and it's got an operational copy of Windows 10 on it right now. So the steps to install Linux are going to be as follows, and it's really straightforward. The first thing we do is we go onto this PC, we open up a browser window, I'm using Microsoft Edge, and we go to the Ubuntu website. So that's at ubuntu.com. Once on the home page, we're going to select Products, and we're going to select Ubuntu Desktop. Now we go to Download Ubuntu Desktop, and on the next screen, there's some useful information that you should be aware of. The first bit of information is down here. The version we want is 24.04.3, which is the long-term support version. That version has 5 years of support. It's the most stable and the most widely used version of Ubuntu Linux now. So whatever you're doing this, if you're downloading a copy of Ubuntu Linux to install, you always want to look for the current version that says LTS on it. Now, the interesting thing here is under the system requirements, this section, you'll note that to install this software, all they're looking for is a 2 gigahertz dual-core processor, 4 gigabytes of memory, and 25 gigabytes of hard drive space. So you can tell that this is software that doesn't use up a whole lot of system resources because they're not asking for a whole lot of system resources to do the install. So this is a pretty lightweight program. Now the next section is how to install, and this is important for just about everybody. There's really 3 primary steps in doing the install. The first is to download the ISO image. The second is to create a bootable USB flash drive with Balena Etcher or similar. And the third is to boot your laptop or PC from the USB flash drive. Now that's a wide-ranging kind of overview of how to do this install. If you need more instructions, there is a step-by-step tutorial here that will walk you through the whole process, but we're going to do it on video. So the first thing we have to do is download the ISO image. So what we're going to do is go to this download button and just click on it. And what you'll see is it takes us to a new page, or if you want, you can sign up for a newsletter. But in just a second or two, the Ubuntu ISO file for installation starts to download. And you can see there's about 5.9 gigabytes of data that has to be downloaded. So depending on your internet speed, that's going to take you a few minutes or maybe a little bit longer. Now then, once your ISO file has fully downloaded, the next thing you need to do is step number 2 in this process. And that is you're going to take that ISO file and you're going to burn it to a bootable USB thumb drive. So I've got my USB thumb drive here. That ISO file has to become a bootable drive in order to get set up on this computer. So that's the next step. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the previous page where we had our instructions. Now it says create a bootable USB drive with Balena Etcher or similar as step number 2. Now you can click on that Balena Etcher link and it will take you to the page to download that software. Here's the kicker. I tried doing this on my Windows 11 PC and it worked fine. I cannot get Balena Etcher to work on my Windows 10 PC. I don't know what the difference is. I have been all over the place trying to fix it. When I looked on various forums online, it's a very, very common problem. If you're running Windows 10, Balena Etcher doesn't seem to work. Fortunately, there's a lot of programs that do the exact same job that are available elsewhere and a little bit more effective. And one of the most common ones is called Rufus. And there's a super easy way to get Rufus on your Windows 10 PC. And that is you just go down to your Start menu, you go to the Microsoft Store, and when you get to the store, you just search for Rufus. And what's going to happen is that software will be the first thing to come up. And as you see, it says it's a reliable USB formatting utility. It's quite small, so we're just going to hit Get, and we're going to wait for that to be installed. So now once Rufus has been installed, all we have to do is hit the Open button, and Rufus is going to run for us. Unfortunately, this software looks kind of complicated, but it's actually really simple to use. So what Rufus does is it's basically going to build that bootable USB flash drive for us. So the first thing we have to do is take our drive, insert it into a USB port on our computer. Now you'll see that on Rufus, it's automatically identified that I have a 32 gigabyte USB drive inserted. Now next it says boot selection, disk or ISO image. That's what we want because it's an ISO image that we're working with. We're going to select that image, which is here in my downloads folder. And pretty much everything else as it's set up works just fine with the default settings. So you don't really need to mess with anything here. So once you've got your USB drive in the first box, you've got your ISO file here, you're ready to hit start. You're going to get a little bit of a message here. Just hit OK. And OK. It's warning you, of course, that all the data on your USB drive is going to be erased because it's making a new format or a new bootable USB drive. So always make sure that your USB drive that you're putting in there, it's empty and it doesn't have anything on there that you want to keep. So now Rufus is going to take a few minutes to make that bootable USB drive from our ISO image. We're going to pause for a little bit to let that happen, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how to go about installing Linux in this Windows 10 PC. Okay, so that process took 7 or 8 minutes to complete, but now it's done, and what we have is a bootable USB drive with the Linux installation files on it. So what we need to do is we're going to close off Rufus. and we need to restart the computer. But if we restart the computer the normal way, what's going to happen is it's going to boot straight back into Windows. It's not going to take us to our installation media. So what we have to do is we have to tell the computer that, hey, I want to restart, but I want to restart by accessing that installation file on the USB drive first. Now there's a number of different ways to do this, but I think for people who aren't familiar with the process, the easiest way is as follows. Go down to your Windows Start icon, go to Settings, go to Update and Security, then to Recovery, and then you see where it says Advanced Startup? There's a button that says Restart Now. We're going to hit Restart Now, and what we're going to get is we're going to get some restart options. And that's going to come up for us in just a moment. And so here's our restart options. Because we started Windows with a bootable USB drive in it, Windows has seen that drive and gives us an option that says Use a Device. And as you see under Use a Device, it says use a USB drive, network connection, or Windows Recovery DVD. So it knows there's bootable media there. It gives us that option under the startup options. So that's exactly what we're going to select. And so what's going to happen is the computer is now going to start from that bootable USB. And it's going to give us some options for starting Ubuntu. Now, I will let you know that when I tried this before, I had a problem with this Dell PC in Windows 10, where I went to load Ubuntu and the video didn't work out. It just got a screen full of snow. So we're going to start Ubuntu in a safe video mode that will make the graphics work and avoid some conflicts with Windows when it comes to graphics drivers. So it can happen where if you load up Ubuntu normally, you're going to get snow. You just override that by going into the safe mode. Now, what happens, and just so you understand the process, this is different than Windows. When I choose Use a Device and we boot from this, it's not going to start installing Ubuntu Linux. What it actually does is it runs Ubuntu Linux from the USB drive. Once Ubuntu is loaded, then it will give me the option to install if I wish. If you don't wish to, you can run Ubuntu off your USB drive. You can play with it. You can see what it's like. It will run more slowly because it's being run from a USB drive, but it gives you a chance to try it out without actually installing on your computer. So let's go ahead. We're going to say we're using a device. Let's click on that. We're going to select the SanDisk Cruiser Glide that my Ubuntu installation media is on. And now the computer is going to start up again. Let's see what happens. Okay, so as I mentioned at this screen, we're going to start Ubuntu in safe graphics mode because I know this computer has some conflicts with the Windows 10 install. Even if you don't know you have conflicts, and starting it in safe graphics mode doesn't hurt anything, and it will make it more likely you won't have any issues when it comes to installing Linux and having it run off this USB drive. So now it's just going to take a minute or two for Ubuntu Linux to load up onto the PC, so we're going to wait for that. Okay, and now we have our Ubuntu Linux desktop loading. We're just going to wait for that process to complete. Okay, now we have some options for how this gets set up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select the English language. I don't need any accessibility settings. I'm using a US English keyboard. I'm going to connect to a Wi-Fi network, and there's a reason I do this. First of all, I like to see this screen because it actually sees the Wi-Fi networks available to me. I know that it's downloaded the drivers for my USB wireless dongle, and I know that that dongle is working, so that's good news. So I'm going to connect to my main Wi-Fi network here in the house. Okay, and there we go. So we hit next. Now at this point, we can either install Ubuntu or we can simply try Ubuntu. If we say try Ubuntu, what it's going to do is it's just going to continue running off my USB stick. Now, that's a great way to just experiment with it and see if it's something you like and you want to use, but it is going to be a lot slower than it would normally be because it's not fully installed on your computer. So as a trial measure, that's great. If you hit try Ubuntu, it's not going to install anything on your computer. It's just running off that stick. When you shut down your computer, pull out the stick, everything is gone and it's wiped out. I'm not doing that. I know I want to install Ubuntu on this computer, so I'm going to go ahead and hit install. I'm going to do an interactive installation. And I'm going to do the extended selection of apps. So if you do default selection, it's very, very basic. Everything about Linux and Ubuntu, the developers are really trying to minimize installing anything that's unnecessary. So a lot of times if you want extras, you have to ask for extras. So in this case, I'm doing an extended selection of applications. This screen's pretty important because, again, Linux likes to strip everything down. So you actually have to say that you're okay having third-party software for your graphics and Wi-Fi hardware being installed. And you have to say you're okay with downloading and installing support for additional media formats. If you don't do this, in order for your computer to run correctly, you're probably going to have to do it later on anyway. So I recommend just doing it when the computer's or when the operating system's being installed. Now this next screen is really, really important. This is asking how you want Ubuntu Linux to be installed, and there's two primary ways. You can install it in addition to your Windows 10 installation. What that means is your Windows 10 installation, all your applications, all of your pictures, your videos, your documents, they all stay in place, and you have an additional Linux installation added to your computer. When you start your computer, it will ask you, do you want to start Linux or do you want to start Windows? Now that's a great way to have two operating systems installed on your PC. If you're not sure you're going to keep Linux, it's a great way to try it out to move your stuff over later. However, it can pose some challenges with some computers, and I know for a fact this Dell is one of them. Having the two operating systems running side by side means you have to go in and fiddle with drivers and get things right. It can cause video issues, etc. So for me on this computer, I'm not going to do side by side. Most computers side by side works fine. I know this one's got a couple of challenges, so I'm not going to worry about it. I am just going to choose option 2, which is to erase my disk and install Ubuntu. Now, if you're going to do this, you have to understand that when you select that option, it is literally going to erase everything off your disk. If you've got photos, documents, videos, they're gone. Your Windows installation is gone. When you start this computer again, all you're going to have is a brand new clean install of Linux. If you're doing that and you've got anything on your computer that you want to keep, make sure you back it all up. So that's what we're going to do. This was a computer I have nothing on anyway. All I had was my Windows 10 installation, and I'm just fine seeing that go. So we're going to erase the disk and install Ubuntu. We'll hit next. Now I need to create my account and a password. It's going to ask me what my time zone is. I get to review what choices I've made, and now we're going to have it install. Now, like most software, Ubuntu is going to give you a whole bunch of cards here that you can go through that tell you a little bit about your new operating system. It talks about some of the applications that you can get with it. It talks about some of the ideology behind the development of Linux and Ubuntu, and some of the other services that is available, how you can game with Linux. It's actually kind of interesting to go through if you're not familiar with Linux, because it just gives you an idea of all the possibilities and things you can do on it. So at this point, this is going to take a little bit to install, so we're just going to take a bit of a pause. We're going to let that install, and then we're going to boot up to a brand new computer, basically, with a new install of Ubuntu Linux. Okay, so now Ubuntu has finished installing on my computer. Now, if I say continue testing on this screen, it's going to continue running just off my USB drive. It's not using the copy of Ubuntu that I've just installed in the computer. So what we want to do instead is we want to go to Restart Now. It's going to restart the computer, and it's going to boot into my installed copy of Ubuntu Linux. And of course, it has to look after a few processes while it's restarting, because this is the first time it's been loaded up, so it does take a little longer than it would if I was restarting normally. But after a minute or two, here you go. Here is my account that I installed. I'll put in the password I entered earlier. And now I'm at my brand new Ubuntu Linux desktop. Now the nice thing is there are some introductory cards that come up when you first install this. You can look at the notes for this release, and there's some information about enabling Ubuntu Pro and some further information. There's some apps that you can install that are recommended, and then it takes you straight to the desktop. One thing you notice about this, it doesn't look a whole lot like Windows. We've got the dock over here, which is like the Windows taskbar. We've got our power and internet and sound up in the upper right instead of the bottom left. But generally, the functionality is pretty much the same. When you go down, this is like the start menu icon on Windows. You go here and it shows you everything that's been installed on the computer. You can see that Linux does not install a lot of bloatware. There's not a lot of programs installed in here. Everything is pretty basic. So there you have it. We have a brand new installation of Linux. And here's what I hope you take away from that. I've seen some people online say, oh, I'd really like to do Linux, but I looked at the installation instructions. It's way too hard. It's really not all that hard. It's pretty straightforward if you follow it step by step. Where it can get dicey is when you're installing a copy of Linux alongside an existing copy of Windows 10 and you want both to work together. I've tried doing that on a couple of these pre-built machines. I've never really gotten it to work that well, or at least I should say it hasn't worked out of the box. It's required some fiddling to get it to work. However, if you've decided you're done with Windows 10, you just want a copy of Linux, you've backed up all your photos and videos and documents, you can do this no problem. This is not hard. And then all you have to do is copy all your photos and videos and documents back into your new installation of Linux, and you're away to the races again. Now, if you'd like to see what you can do with this computer, the kinds of things that you can expect with Linux, don't forget to check out my previous video where we talked about whether or not Linux is a good operating system for people living Windows 10. I hope you found this helpful. I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Again, I'm Graham Hughes, and this is Tech Talk.